All right, so let's transition to our last panel before lunch, and we have Casey, who is a Nevada forester and fire warden. We have Jason Vasquez, who leads the California Tahoe Conservancy, and we have Julie Reagan, who of course leads our Tahoe Regional Planning Agency. So thanks all for joining, and you're going to spend about a half an hour just sharing with us what's happening in the basin to keep us safe and keep our lands healthy.
Thank you. I think I'm up first. I'm Casey with the Nevada Division of Forestry. Welcome to the Nevada side of the Tahoe Basin, the jewel of the Sierras. We're going to talk a little bit very specifically about what's happening in the Tahoe Basin across the two states. So first I want to say this forest, this lovely forest and this beautiful lake that you see is not the forest that the Washoe tribe lived in prior and that the settlers came and saw earlier. It was a much different looking forest in the earlier, boy, it's a little slower than I am talking. I've had a lot of coffee. It was really cold down there. It was much more sparsely dense. We had uneven age classes and a diversity of species. As many of you probably know, this area was largely clear-cut in the Comstock era as we were looking for silver. Most of this wood was taken and shipped over to Virginia City to support that infrastructure in the late 1800s. So when the forest grew back, it came back unnaturally dense. We had an even age stand. Most of the trees were of the same age, and a less diversity in species. So this coupled with, decades and centuries of fire suppression, the lack of coordinated fuels reduction, sometimes the inability to get logging done because of past practices, and all of these issues, density of populations coming in, the fuels began to accumulate to unnatural conditions. And that's kind of, even though lovely, what you see out there today. We became highly vulnerable to wildfire, as everyone knows. So I'm going into June 24th, 2007, an abandoned illegal campfire sparked the Angora fire. At the time, this was one of the most devastating fires in the state of California from a loss perspective, with 254 homes and 3,100 acres. Since then, they have, reached or exceeded that target almost every year. In August of 2007, we had multiple issues during the response to the Angora fire. The two governors of the states of California and Nevada pulled together the California-Nevada Tahoe Basin Fire Commission. This was formed really to look at what are the things that we needed to do across all of these systems to make a difference in the future. That came up with 48 findings and 90 recommendations spanning multiple issues from, hang on, my page won't turn because my fingers aren't working. They brought in a whole bunch of experts, stakeholders, agency, industry, state, federal, local government, tribal partners, individuals who lived here, individuals who were affected by this fire to ask what is it that we collectively needed to do differently. One of the big, both in the short term and the long term, to fix the wildfire issues growing in the Tahoe Basin. This brought together more than 20 partner agencies in the Tahoe Fire and Fuels team, updating policies, laws, individual things like our dispatch centers. Across two states, our dispatch centers didn't talk. So as the fire was burning in the state of California, Nevada's assets were sitting there unused. We didn't know that until we knew that. So now we know, and our assets are in both dispatch centers and are dispatched across two states. Water infrastructure, something we didn't necessarily think about, but we didn't have much in the Tahoe Basin. Some of these homes had been here for a while, and they didn't have hydrants in their communities, and they didn't have pipes large enough to fuel the pumps in our water tenders. So there were a few issues that came out. Together, the Tahoe Fire and Fuels team started prioritizing projects across jurisdictions. They started planning 5 and 10 years out, saying, what are we going to do and how are we going to make a difference? Because not just the suppression side needed help, but also the resilient landscapes piece. So they began implementing thousands of acres of treatments across the Tahoe Basin. Now flash forward to the Caldor fire on August 14th of 2021. This fire was 221,835 acres, 1,005 structures destroyed with 81 more damaged. This was the second fire in that same year that came all the way across the Sierra Mountains, which is something that we never thought could happen. We don't say that anymore. It can't happen because it does, and it proves us all to be liars. So twice that happened. This was a human-caused fire from gunshots. It was very, very devastating to the folks and the ecosystems. There were a lot of successes on this fire as well, kind of to the point of the earlier panel. We had a lot of fuel reduction projects in place. I'm not going to focus on all of them. There were many on the other side of the basin. I want to talk about a wall of fire that was coming into the Tahoe Basin, into Christmas Valley, in an area at the top of that ridge on Echo Summit, which naturally should have stopped a fire, but it was crowning and it dropped in. And so the efforts of this interagency team in the Christmas Valley, it didn't stop the fire from coming into those communities. It slowed it, and it brought it from a crown fire in the top of the trees down to the ground, where firefighters were able to successfully save the homes and lives in the Christmas Valley. We had no loss of structures on the Nevada side. You can see all the treatments in green here that were put in place. We knew when we were planning these interagency projects that fire was going to move down and in, so our goal was to get it to push up and around those communities, and that is where that fire went, up into areas that were not treated yet. So one of the things that we, let's see. Oh, and this doesn't happen by chance. One of the things I want to make sure that you understand is there's a lot of planning. It's easier for us to come into planning just for our agency's sake. And that's what we did for quite a few years. We worked well alongside each other. We worked well when it made sense. This was a whole different way of working together in the Tahoe Basin, and actually became the model for shared stewardship across many states as we move forward. This involved a lot of planning. We had to update a community wildfire protection plans in all of these communities. We needed to update a multi-jurisdictional fuel reduction and wildfire plan, and then moving into a forest action plan, which was bigger than just fuels treatments and suppression treatments. And I'm going to bring Jason up next.
Casey, thank you. That was a tour de force of explanation. And kudos to your GIS expert, because that is an incredible use of GIS.
That was Forrest.
Thank you, Forrest Schaefer.
Well, thank you, Casey. I'm Jason Vasquez. I'm the Executive Director at the California Tahoe Conservancy. And I'll caveat this presentation with, if you hear my teeth chattering, I apologize. But I'll try and go through this and get us out of here. So as Casey pointed out, the history of wildfires in the Tahoe Basin sort of forced us to rethink how we do business. And it led to that creation of the Tahoe Fire and Fuels team, which is 21 agencies that come together and coordinate treatments every year. But with the recent fires, we've also recognized the need to really scale up what we're doing. Coordination alone isn't enough. We really need to get up to scale and get out in front of the size of the wildfires that we're starting to see. And so the Tahoe Fire and Fuels team in 2019 created the Forest Action Plan, which is what you see here on screen. And the Forest Action Plan essentially provides guidance on how we can most effectively meet that challenge of forest resilience. And there's 3 strategies in that Forest Action Plan, and I'm going to talk about 2 of them today. Those 3 strategies are We have to scale up, strategy 1. We have to build capacity, strategy 2, and we have to use innovative technology to really increase the efficiency and efficacy of what we're doing out on the landscape. And we heard a lot of really good things about the use of technology in the panel before us today, so I'm gonna not focus on that one, and instead I'm gonna focus on what we're doing in the Tahoe Basin to meet that challenge of scale, and what we're doing in the Tahoe Basin to meet that challenge of building capacity. So, in the Tahoe Basin, there are literally thousands of publicly owned parcels. And we've had to move away from planning and implementing at the scale of individual parcels. And now we're starting to plan and implement at the scale of entire neighborhoods. And so we work together with all of our partners, the local jurisdictions, federal partners, state partners, to go into an area and treat entire neighborhoods rather than just coordinating on, okay, well, you go work over there, we're gonna go do this project over here. And that's really helped us, I think, get out in front of that threat of catastrophic wildfire and really help change the game when it comes to things like Caldor. Additionally, one of the other things that I think has been really game-changing for us in the Tahoe Basin, and I think can be a great model for the entire state, is we've created this concept that we call power line resilience corridors. And what this really is it's a collaborative approach between all of the different agencies that work on fire and the public utilities like Liberty Utilities here in the Tahoe Basin. And through this partnership, the idea is that while you're right under that power line corridor, the utilities company does a very comprehensive treatment to prevent any sparks that might happen or any strikes and fire coming in and protect that critical infrastructure. And as you move away from that power line, the state agencies or federal agencies or local jurisdictions start to implement a forest health treatment. And as you get further and further away, you get more into a forest health treatment. The closer you are to those power line resilience corridors, the more aggressive fuels treatment is. And we've been able to do this in partnership largely because our partners at Liberty Utilities were able to program this strategy into their wildfire mitigation plans and commit funding and resources to partner with state and federal agencies to do this type of work. And I think that's just been really game-changing for us in the Tahoe Basin. The second strategy I talked about, that's just examples of sort of how we can try and scale up here in the Tahoe Basin. The second strategy I talked about is about building capacity. And so yesterday on your tour, a lot of you went down to the sawmill. I mean, that's one fantastic example of where there's a tribal and a private partnership that has brought really critical capacity to this region for processing forest resilience products. Additionally, we're able to work strategically through the Tahoe Fire and Fuels team to place funds on the ground in a strategic way and really leverage federal dollars with state dollars with private dollars. And that's been super helpful in creating capacity. But we're also making long-term investments in our partnerships and in our workforce. And so we're using general fund wildfire money and RFFCP money coupled with state dollar or federal dollars to invest in local jurisdiction capacity, the Tahoe Resource Conservation Districts, our local fire protection districts, so that they have the folks and the expertise available to conduct planning and manage fuels reduction projects and couple those with what's going on public lands as well. The next thing I want to talk about a little bit is the benefit when we think about scaling up and when we think about building capacity, but the benefit of looking at multi-use, multi-benefit projects. And so it's really important that we think about wildlife and the movement and needs of wildlife as we think about our fuels treatment projects. Here in the Tahoe Basin, I mentioned we have thousands of parcels, individual parcels, scattered throughout the basin that are publicly owned, whether they're federal owned, state owned, local jurisdictions. We have to think about how we treat those parcels to maintain wildlife corridors, to promote biodiversity, and we need to be thinking about how we do these treatments so that we can really take advantage of recreational purposes and integrate our forest treatments with recreational needs and trail building and things like that. That model of taking a multi-benefit approach to things is really how we implement the environmental improvement program here in Tahoe, which I think is a really unique program here in Tahoe, where we think about water quality, wildlife, biodiversity, recreation, transportation. And to talk a little bit more about that integration with the environmental improvement program, I want to introduce Julie Reagan to come up next.
Hey, thank you. And as Julie comes up, I just want to commend the work of the Tahoe Fire and Fuels team, specifically with the utility. You know, every time we go to somewhere new in the state, we learn something new. And for me, the big idea, one big idea that you share is coordinating utility vegetation management with our state and federally funded vegetation management. You know, our colleagues identified, was it 100,000 miles of line clearing? If we can optimize the billions of dollars that utilities have to spend on wildfire, mitigation work, and with our billions of dollars of public money, we're going to be so much stronger. And last year, some of us did a tour and actually saw the work of the vegetation clearing under the lines. And thanks to the U.S. Forest Service, the coordination with shaded fuel breaks. It just improves the effectiveness of those investments so much more. And it's something we should, frankly, see across the state. And I'm hoping we see across the state. Over to you, Julie.
Thank you, Secretary Crowfoot, members of the task force, and Jason and Casey. What an honor to clean up here. I know lunch is imminent, so believe me, I'm not going to draw it out, but maybe just everybody move around a little bit, because I know it's a little bit cold. I know I need to move around. I'm Julie Reagan, and I'm the Executive Director of the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency. Welcome to our beautiful Lake Tahoe. I want to talk about the power of collaboration. You've heard it from my colleagues, and we talk a lot about epic collaboration here in the basin, and there are so many benefits, as you've heard, but it also saves lives, and I think sometimes that gets lost in the discussions around collaboration. It's nice and important to do, but it also saves lives in this topic of fire, and that intersects with all the other work that we're doing to save this gem of the Sierra. So as you've heard, we're making a lot of progress here in Tahoe, in the region, and at the heart of it is our lake. It pulls everyone together, and working together is an area that we have come to excel in here in the basin. And there's just no better example of it than our Lake Tahoe Environmental Improvement Program, or the EIP, if you hear the acronym, the EIP for short. It really is a very large watershed restoration, and our agency, the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, is so proud to lead that, to co-lead that group of leaders with the U.S. Forest Service and 80 different partners. What is the EIP? You know, it's a comprehensive undertaking with the priority areas of watershed restoration and biodiversity, land conservation, protecting native species, improving lake clarity, but it also includes forest health, transportation, sustainable recreation, and improving data collection and scientific research, which you've heard is so critical. But let me just scale it up a little bit. When we talk about the health and resilience of the basin, we're really talking about land managers and communities coming together to protect and restore this incredible natural resource that has literally been here for eons. Recent findings have been in the news lately that Lake Tahoe was formed more than 2 million years ago, making it the oldest lake on the North American continent and the third oldest lake on Earth. So just that kind of knowledge puts the work of restoration and resilience into some perspective. And it also helps us appreciate the stewardship of the native Washoe tribe of Nevada and California that my fellow panelists have mentioned today. You know, Lake Tahoe is the homeland of the Washoe people, and I want to acknowledge that they've protected and preserved this land and water of Lake Tahoe for hundreds of generations. And as a sovereign nation, the role of the Washoe is integral to the spirit of partnership that we now have built and are continuing in the basin. And we appreciate the tribe's engagement along the west shore at Meeks Bay, which you can see in the top picture, by returning indigenous practices in the landscape, including cultural birding, and the habitat restoration to support the reintroduction of the native Lahontan cutthroat trout. It was an honor to join tribal members, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Director, who visited Lake Tahoe, and Eric Walker, the Basin Management Forest Supervisor here, at a reintroduction event of Lahontan cutthroat trout at Meeks Bay this summer. We actually got to put the fish in the water, and it was a huge thrill, one of the coolest things I might have ever done in my position at CRPA. The partnerships that you're hearing about truly run deep. The Tahoe Regional Planning Agency was created through a very complicated relationship and partnership in an interstate compact between the states of California and Nevada all the way back in 1969. Those two radical hippies, Ronald Reagan and Paul Laxalt, got together and said, you know what, by golly, we're not gonna let this lake turn gray on our watch. And that friendship inspired the two state legislatures and Congress and the President of the United States to sign this compact. And it still remains very unique in the United States and gives us this partnership responsibility to manage environmental protection and growth management in the basin across state lines and across the watershed. So as you can see, the heart and soul of the watershed is true, and we are one of the clearest large lakes in the world. Now we know one of the oldest. So the compact that made protecting the lake's incredible clarity, job one, remains our cornerstone and our touchstone. Our agency adopted a regional plan that unified environmental planning across the basin, and it's complicated because we have 5 counties, we have 2 states, the federal government, 50,000 private properties, 80% of the land is managed by the Basin Management Unit at the Forest Service. We have state land, local government land. And so just think of all of that controversy and collaboration that has to go on to get the job done. We also have, as was mentioned by Jason, a checkerboard of urban lots, as we call them, sprinkled throughout the basin, owned by the California Tahoe Conservancy, the Forest Service, and Nevada Division of State Lands. So this collaboration is really at the center of everything that we do, and Tahoe was one of the first areas to model this restoration across boundaries at the landscape scale. The EIP has become one of the most successful restoration programs in the nation, with more than 80 partners that participate, all towards this common goal. In the beginning, back in '97, we had our first presidential summit, which really put the environmental improvement program on the map. Thanks to the late Senators Harry Reid and Dianne Feinstein, we were able to get a presidential visit, Vice President Gore accompanying President Clinton to Lake Tahoe, and that really put this partnership in a more structured framework with agreements and an executive order that set us up for this now 30 years later restoration in progress. So it was really a pivotal moment to have this summit, and we're proud that we've been able to do it every single year since 1997. It's quite a feat. And the funding then followed from the Lake Tahoe Restoration Act first in 2000, the Southern Nevada Public Land Management Act to help leverage other sectors, the states, the local governments, the private sector. We have a very robust private sector philanthropy community and people that give their time, talent, and treasure to support this overall goal of the EIP. And the late Senator Feinstein called us Team Tahoe. So any past or present members of Team Tahoe, raise your hand. Come on, don't be shy. Secretary Crowfoot, yes, thank you. We are a team, and she came up here one year and said, you know what, I think we've really built something here. This is a team, and we approach all the hard problems that we have to solve in that manner. Our water quality restoration plan for the basin is also a story of its own, but I will condense and basically just say we have these state and federal regulations in place, but we also have our own vision of getting back to roughly 100 feet of clarity. We're making progress through watershed restoration, as you can see in this slide with the Upper Truckee Marsh, a lot of progress in that front. You know, considering the age of the lake, a minuscule amount of time that we've been here, our human activity, has brought a lot of change in the watershed. So we certainly heard about the logging impacts and the past practices in forestry, but what we're actually doing in this environment that is a very low growth area is doing that restoration and bringing it back over time. So the lake's clarity certainly remains one of our touchstones. Now you're hearing about our successes, but collaboration isn't always easy. With this incredible blue lake, mountains and forests surrounding us every day, inspiration is very easy to find, hard to get the work done. And the Caldor Fire was also an example of this. And really it hits home to me. Our home in Christmas Valley was one of those that was spared by the great firefighting force that we had. So along with 30,000 other South Shore residents, we were under evacuation orders. We were out of our home for 2 weeks. You know, I watched those videos of seeing those flames roll into Christmas Valley after our local friends had said, we'll stop it, and it didn't. And just that emotion is something I will never forget for the rest of my life. But because we had been prepared and done some very healthy fuels reduction work and home hardening, and as a community had been through this and bonded as a team, we were able to have our firefighters save our home as embers were burning all over the valley and give them a fighting chance to not lose one permanent home in Christmas Valley and in the South Lake Tahoe area. So the work that we're putting in is worth the fight. I am so proud of the partnerships that we have built and grown over time, and the work continues. I want to just really thank the Tahoe Fire and Fuels team, and this picture says it all. Our community, still, you'll see thank you firefighters, even though the fire was 3 years ago. There's probably still from the Angora wildfire, now coming up on 20 years ago. It doesn't happen with that kind of collaboration. And there are a lot of cooks in the kitchen in Tahoe and in the fire service across the nation. So when we lose that turf and that jurisdictional authority and we work together in a unified way, we've proven that we can get the job done, that we can save our communities, and we can save this treasured landscape. We have a bright spot in that the Congress just approved the Lake Tahoe Restoration Act recently, and that will allow us to continue investment at the federal level, which is truly the backbone support that leverages other funds from the state of California, the state of Nevada, our local governments, and the private sector. So we're very pleased that we were able to celebrate that just last week with a bipartisan, bicameral approach to supporting Lake Tahoe for the future. So that authorizes more funding because it is expensive to do this work, and we know that we have to continue the work if we're going to be successful. So our collective work does continue, and it will get challenging more and more every day. So our partnership must grow stronger. While it's true that enormous change has happened in the fraction of a second that we've inhabited the Tahoe Basin, it's been an even shorter amount of time that we've implemented strong preservation and protection programs, and we're making progress across the board. In the scope of the lake's existence, we have to consider that building regional resilience is not only important work for us today and the next generation, but that our goals should be protecting Lake Tahoe for the ages. So thank you again, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
So many lessons that we can learn from your collective work here in the Tahoe Basin. And to me, as we go to lunch, first and foremost, the work that we're doing across 2 states matters and can make a difference. And there's no better example of that than the Caldor fire. I remember the collective heartbreak late that night when the fire crested over the Sierra Nevada summit, as Casey said, something we didn't think could happen before that year. And the anticipation that the fire would rage into Christmas Valley and South Lake. And really just the miracle in so many ways of a ton of heroic firefighting combined with those upfront treatments that were done years before as a result of this collective work saved this basin. And it's just, there's no more powerful example of that. I know some of us are going to have a chance to actually get on the ground and learn that lesson outside tomorrow during the Caldor Fire Tour. But just huge thanks for the work that you're collectively doing. At all levels, and I think it serves a powerful model that we can learn from in the task force. With that, we're going to shift to lunch.